Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is with me again as Liverpool close in on the Premier League title. We're going to get stuck into a few different bits across the course of the season that have led to that point. Liverpool just a point away, of course, from confirming themselves as Premier League champions. We're going to have a little bit of a chat about the celebrations and the Arsenal Crystal Palace game as well, which obviously worked out in a quite nice way for Liverpool, I think, in the end. Before we get stuck into the main show, though, of course, a message, as ever, from our sponsors. Don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box, which is below. But Tom, let's get straight to it. I'm sure, like me, you were watching the Arsenal against Crystal Palace match. We just discussed it a little bit before we pressed record on this show, but it was a slightly more stressful ending than I was expecting, to be honest. I thought Arsenal would win. Virgil van Dijk said a few days ago that he thought Arsenal would win as well. I think most people thought that, but Crystal Palace gave them a little bit of a scare, but as we were saying, it feels like the perfect result almost for Liverpool. They only need a point now, of course, but they get to celebrate it on their own terms as well. Were you cheering on Arsenal last night as well?
Yeah, it was an odd sensation because obviously, sadly, in our lifetimes, we haven't had this many times, have we? Liverpool are on the verge of winning a league title, and it's hard to kind of take your emotion out of it in some ways, but yeah, I think last night I was kind of hoping for a draw in a sense. Obviously, you want to win it in front of your home fans, and Liverpool have got that golden opportunity now at the weekend against Tottenham. And I think that's, on the balance of things, probably the best case scenario for Liverpool. I think we've all dreamt up down the years, haven't we, them scenes at Anfield. And finally, hopefully, we're going to get to see that in a few days' time. But yeah, I thought the game itself, from a neutral point of view, was... it was an incredible watch, really, wasn't it? I thought Palace really brought a challenge to Arsenal throughout the game. I thought in the early stages of the game, they were going to kind of run away with it. Arsenal, obviously, they got the goal early on, but then the Eze goal, the great quality from him. And I think a lot of clubs will be looking at him in the summer. And then Mateta off the bench, did really well, didn't he? And that goal was sublime as well. Probably one of the best goals I've seen so far this season. So, yeah, it was a great game, but yeah, it does give Liverpool that chance now, I guess, to win in front of the home fans, which ultimately I think is the dream of most Liverpool fans now.
Yeah, especially I think after what happened last time. Obviously, the pandemic was on at the time, and Liverpool fans couldn't celebrate it properly anyway, but it obviously happened last time when City were playing against Chelsea, and that finished in a draw, and obviously then things happen in a certain way that mean that you kind of win it not on your own terms. And obviously, even if Liverpool had have won it last night, it would have still been Liverpool that have won it rather than somebody else that have lost it. And I think we should be careful to frame it in that way. But it just makes it a little bit nicer, doesn't it? I don't know what your plans are for the weekend in terms of, I don't know whether you'll be there or whatever it might be, but it's just the best way to win it, isn't it? I think you've seen that always with any team. It's the best way to do it. By, hopefully, as long as Liverpool don't lose, hopefully doing it at Anfield in those circumstances, it will just make it feel like a much bigger occasion, won't it? There's lots, the parade will come further down the line. There'll be lots of celebrations. There'll be, things all across the summer, I'm sure, even when the players return for pre-season, they'll be asked questions about it. And, there'll be questions going into next season of, can you do it again? But to have that moment, it will be a huge celebration, a huge let-off, I think, at Anfield on Sunday. And right from the first whistle, I'm expecting a really big atmosphere in that game.
Yeah, it's going to be a carnival atmosphere, isn't it? And like you say, I think it's pent-up emotions of probably 35 years, a whole generation of fans and maybe even their children coming up now as well who've not witnessed Liverpool win a league title in the ground. And I always think back to what people have said about, when Liverpool won it last time in front of fans in 1990, almost it was expected that Liverpool would win it, maybe the next year or the year after that. And, the fans have gone on and on and on, kind of waiting all these years. And I think, yeah, like you say, it's going to be an amazing atmosphere, I think, at the weekend. And, the COVID season, we knew how that played out, and Liverpool were incredible across that season, weren't they? Jurgen Klopp, the job he did, the amount of points they were able to chalk up, winning it earlier than any other side has in history. But yeah, to not have that chance to kind of do the parades and that sort of thing, I think years on now, looking back at it, I think we all kind of, that's kind of what you look forward to. And I think that, possibly this gives us all that opportunity now as fans and as reporters as well. Everyone's kind of worked towards that as well, and it's a big opportunity, isn't it, for everyone involved really to enjoy it. And yeah, I think like many fans, I'm looking to kind of relish it, and I'm really looking forward to the game now at the weekend.
Yeah, I think the word you use there is absolutely spot on. It's going to be a carnival atmosphere. It's going to feel like a big occasion. I'm sure people will get in the ground early. It'll be, one of those days that you look back, and then it'll be, I'm sure, a privilege to be there for everybody who is. But I want to focus a little bit more on a few of the key moments throughout the season as well. We don't tend to look back too often, and to be fair, there's not really a lot of individual games or individual goals that have really meant that Liverpool have gone on to win this Premier League. It's not really been that kind of season. It's not really that kind of team, I don't think, under Arne Slot. It's very much a consistent, very level-headed, very stable team. There's only been one or two late goals, obviously a couple of weeks ago against West Ham, but I think it's fair to say if Virgil van Dijk hadn't scored that goal, it wouldn't make any difference in terms of the title being won. You look back to Darwin Núñez at Brentford as well. But aside from that, there's not really been a huge amount of late drama, which obviously makes things easier for the likes of myself when you're doing player ratings and trying to pick out things like that and not having to do late rewrites. But it's been a little bit less of a moment season. But I do think there's a few different things that I wanted to pick out, really. I'd probably go right back to one of the first games of the season, the 3-0 win at Manchester United. Now, obviously, in the context of the full season, it doesn't look quite as impressive when Manchester United are as low down in the table as what they are, what they've become. They've obviously changed managers since. They've had one of the worst seasons that they ever could have. There was a talk at some point of potential relegation. Now, that wasn't ever going to happen, but that does sort of sum up the decline and the struggles that they've had throughout the course of this season. But I think going back all the way to that game, it did feel like a big moment, really. It was the first big win for Arne Slot. Obviously, Liverpool haven't had the best record at Old Trafford. They'd gone there a couple of times last season under Jurgen Klopp and not managed to get the results that they deserved. But I think for me, that was one of the first moments when you really thought that the transition really was going to be really smooth for Arne Slot to go there and produce what was at the time a statement performance. As I say, I think if that had have happened at this point in the season, you'd have been expecting it. But it's always a tricky game, really, for any new manager to go there and win convincingly in the manner that they did. I think was really important. So yeah, that's the first one that I'm going to pick out. That 3-0 win against Manchester United. How important do you think that was in the context of this season?
I think it was the first big milestone, I think, in his tenure, really. Obviously when a new manager comes in, especially following a manager like Jurgen Klopp and, the hold he had over the fans and what he'd been able to generate in them 8 or 9 years that he was at Anfield, to succeed a manager like that is a hard job in itself. And I think we all came into the season thinking, possibly if Liverpool can get into the Champions League and go on a cup run, maybe win a cup, that would have been a fantastic season for Liverpool. But I think that was the first game where I really envisaged, you look at the fixture guide and I think Liverpool were maybe 3 games into the season by then, but it just felt like a massive marker. Many managers have gone away to Old Trafford and not been able to get a result. I don't think we had the best record, like you say, under Jurgen Klopp there as well. So, yeah, I think to go there and, put in such a measured performance, we know, like I say, they haven't had the best of seasons. It's been very up and down for them, obviously. But, yeah, I think Liverpool looked a class above Man United that day. And, yeah, just kind of go there and silence the crowd that we know is always there. It's such a difficult place to go for Liverpool, especially, and Manchester City being neighbours to them as well. It's a derby fixture, essentially, isn't it? And, yeah, I think to go there, to silence the crowd, not really look awestruck by the whole occasion, and that's been the story of the season. I think that's kind of led on from there then, and possibly that was a springboard, that game, I think, and I think you're right to pick it out because, I think it was kind of a landmark occasion in his reign, and he's going to win the league this season, and he's already written his name into history when that moment does come. And I think that was possibly, like I say, the springboard for the success that he's been able to generate in the games that have gone on from there. So, yeah, I think it was a major moment in the season, that.
Yeah, there's none of the moments, I should say, that I've picked out that are directly linked to Arne Slot. But I think the Arne Slot kind of calmness and composure, there was no moment where he's ever looked overawed. His team, obviously, on that occasion and on occasions since then, has been very much consistent in the way that it's performed and the way that it's turned up to these big games and been able to deal with the pressures and deal with anything along those sorts of lines, really. I think it's really, really important that Liverpool have had those moments early on. It would have been, easy for him, obviously, to have maybe had that performance and not been able to get on and win that game and get over the line. And then it just sows a little bit of a seed of doubt maybe next time that happens. But there's just been so many moments, really, where he's been able to do that at the first time of asking. And obviously, winning the league title is a perfect example of all of those things, really. The second of the big moments that I wanted to touch upon is, again, not a direct one linked to Liverpool or to Arne Slot, but more linked with Manchester City and Arsenal. I think it's fair to say most people, myself included, if I'm being totally honest, thought that it would be one of those two teams that did win in the end this season. Obviously, City going to most seasons as favourites. Arsenal, if it wasn't going to be City, were most people's pick to take that next step because of what they've been building in the last 2 or 3 years with Mikel Arteta. But obviously City have dropped off a huge amount. Arsenal didn't buy a striker, didn't have enough options really in forward areas to be able to compete across the course of the season. They've drawn 13 of their games, which I think tells you they need a little bit more firepower, very defensively effective and very good in that department, but just not quite able to score enough goals. And I think we've got to be careful not to take away from Liverpool too much, because clearly Liverpool have been very good. But I do think it's worth touching on the other two teams that were expected to compete with Liverpool as well. How surprised are you that Arsenal weren't able to make the next step? And how surprised were you at how far Manchester City had declined this season?
Yeah, both have been a shock, really. I mean, like you say, you always expect coming into the season, certainly City, under Pep Guardiola, they've been incredible, haven't they, in the amount of titles they've been able to win, and still the great players they've got in the squad. And it just seems like, a lot of players there have maybe declined together, or, there just doesn't seem to be the same amount of energy. I think things have improved slightly since January, but things still don't quite seem perfect, and I think they'll look to address that in the summer. But yeah, I think this season it just looks like maybe one race too many for them as a squad. And yeah, I was really surprised. And I think, the two games that Liverpool have been able to play against them this season, I think they've been really telling of where the two teams are at the moment. I think, Liverpool were quite dominant in both of the games, weren't they? And, I think the results that Liverpool were able to get were really impressive, given, again, you've got a new manager who's come in. He wasn't overawed by, the size of the club and the opposition that Liverpool were playing. He was just really measured in his approach. And he made a couple of experiments going into them games as well, didn't he? Obviously, the Luis Diaz one, I think we hadn't seen that too many times coming into that game. And, he took a bit of a gamble there, and it certainly worked, I felt, on the day up against City in that first home game. As for Arsenal, I think one of the results that I noted down before coming on this was the 2-2 away at the Emirates. I thought that was really telling as well of just how measured Arne Slot can be. And, I felt that Mohamed Salah, in that game showed the best of what he's able to do as well. An 81st minute equaliser in that game. And I always feel like if you go away to one of them big grounds, coming away with a point over the course of a season is always pretty much a good result. Obviously, there are certain times where the context of the season where you've got to go there and win, but I felt in that instance, it was a great result. And, to come from behind as well, I felt that it almost felt like Liverpool had took the advantage rather than Arsenal at that stage in the season. And yeah, I think those are results that kind of, they stick out to me, certainly doing the double over Man City and also going away to the Emirates and getting a 2-2 away there where, there was a massive atmosphere that night, wasn't there? And I think maybe to get that equaliser, it almost felt like we'd won, even though it was a draw. So, yeah, I think that those were big markers in the season. And, yeah, I have been surprised as well that they haven't really been able to mount a challenge as well. So it has been a bizarre season in some respects in that way. But, yeah, I think Liverpool, they've kind of dampened down the noise at times as well, haven't they? And I think those results are quite telling in that respect as well.
Yeah, I think if you can certainly beat your title rivals at home and then get at least a point away from home, that's usually a pretty good formula, isn't it? We know how consistent Liverpool have been against the rest of the teams, but obviously to beat City home and away, to go to Arsenal and get what was a deserved point, but as you say, one that they had to come from behind and get and dig deep in that one. They've still got to play Arsenal, obviously, at home. We think that the title will be done by that point, but obviously that's probably worked in Liverpool's favour as well. But I don't want to dwell too much on City and Arsenal. I think it's going to be said plenty of times that it's a weak league and all of that kind of nonsense, which I don't think is the case at all. I think you can see that from how hard it has been. The fact that Crystal Palace very nearly went to Arsenal and won tells you that a team that's struggled for a lot of this season and has only really started to improve in the last few weeks has gone there and done that with some of the players that we mentioned before. I think that tells its own story, really, in terms of the quality of the Premier League. But there's a couple of tactical bits that I wanted to touch on as well. I think one of the stories of this season, one of the big successes for Liverpool has been Ryan Gravenberch playing that number 6 position. Obviously, we know what happened with Martin Zubimendi last summer. Liverpool went for him, didn't end up happening. Gravenberch has obviously taken on that role and really excelled. Is he a contender, do you think, for Liverpool's player of the season this season? Because he's just been so perfect. He started every Premier League game and every Champions League game apart from the PSV one. He's clearly a player that Arne Slot trusts. He's clearly a player that suits the way that he wants that number 6 to play in that midfield as well. How good has he been, do you think, this season?
I think he's been excellent. And, the biggest credit you can give him is obviously the big talking point coming into the season was whether Liverpool needed that number 6. And obviously that approach for Zubimendi at Real Sociedad as well was well documented. And, to come in and quietly go about his business in them early weeks of the season when the jury was still out about him in that role, and then to really grow into the team. And now, like to say, he's been a near ever-present in what's going to be a historic season for Liverpool. And, it's really interesting to me that when you think of the spine of Liverpool, you often reel off the obvious names, Alisson, Van Dijk, Mo Salah up front. But I think he's on the verge now, for me, of maybe working his way into that conversation. He's that important as a cog in this side. And I think players around him have actually improved as well because they've been able to almost get on with what they're best at doing as well. I felt in his first season, Alexis McAllister was asked to play kind of 3 roles in one at times, wasn't he? And, we loved the legs that he's got, but now, Dominic Szoboszlai is able to kind of take that role. He's not having to do as much of the playmaking, from deep because Ryan Gravenberch has got that eye for a pass and, he can kind of roll into midfield and that sort of thing with the ball. So it's kind of opened him up as well. And he's been an excellent member of that midfield so far this season as well. And he deserves a lot of credit. But yeah, I think overall, Ryan Gravenberch, I think, again, that's been one of the real stories of this season. It's been a real success story for Arne Slot. And I think, when the dust settles on what Liverpool have been able to do so far this season, he's going to be one of them names that is going to be talked about for years to come. And hopefully, again, this is a bit of a springboard for him. As a young lad, he obviously went to Bayern, got his big move, and it didn't quite work for him. Came to Liverpool his first season, was a bit mixed, a bit up and down, but this season, he's knuckled down, he's been excellent. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what's to come from him because obviously he's so young as well. He's still got potential, I think, to step it up a notch. And to be honest, I think Liverpool need another midfielder, maybe a bit of an all-rounder, but I think his position in the team is now fixed from where I'm standing. And, he deserves massive credit for that. I think he's been excellent across the season.
Yeah, I think one of the things we possibly should have touched on with Manchester City, obviously Rodri plays in that position for them. He's been injured, and that was, I think, a big turning point in their season. It's obviously indirectly helped Liverpool, the fact that they've not been able to compete. But it does just show how important that position is to get right. To have the perfect player in that position is hugely, hugely beneficial. And I agree with you. I think there's more to come from Ryan Gravenberch. The only worry that I've got really with him is that he's never played this volume of minutes before. The only argument really for signing another player in that position is to give him a little bit of a support and a help. But I think that's pretty difficult to make the case really. If Martin Zubimendi, for example, was looking at Liverpool this summer as an option, I think possibly he would look at it now and think, well, I'm probably not going to play ahead of Ryan Gravenberch, so I'm not going to go there. And I think that does make it a little bit more difficult, but no less important, really, in terms of making sure that there is another option in there, just to make sure that you've got that freshness. There has been, I think it's fair to say, 1 or 2 games where maybe Ryan Gravenberch could have done with a rest, but then you can't spend 50 million quid on a player who's going to play once or twice when Ryan Gravenberch is a little bit tired. So it is a difficult situation, but certainly a good one for Gravenberch to be able to kick on. I think in a weird way, another player that I wanted to pick out as kicking on is Mohamed Salah as well. I think it's fair to say that Arne Slot has got much more out of him as a rounded footballer. And, whether that is tactically down to the way that Liverpool play, whether it's just Salah has, been needing to earn that new contract that, of course, he's now signed and been able to secure the next 2 years and convince Liverpool that he's going to be at that same level for that period of time as well. But obviously, Ryan Gravenberch has been exceptional. Alisson and Van Dijk, you mentioned before, but Mohamed Salah as well has gone off the boil a little bit in terms of the last 2 or 3 weeks. Goals and assists maybe haven't come as freely as what they did before, but we shouldn't talk that down at all. I asked you before if Ryan Gravenberch is Liverpool's player of the season. I think probably the only answer to that is no, because of Van Dijk and Mo Salah. But yeah, Salah, I think it's fair to say, has found a new level as well. He's very much a playmaker now, as much as he is a goal scorer, which I think is possibly not something that people would have spoken about a huge amount before this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were question marks again coming into the season, wasn't there, of whether Liverpool may have even been better cashing in the summer. There were a few people saying that. Heading into this season, obviously, I think he got 18 league goals last season. Probably wasn't his best return at Liverpool in terms of the league. I think that was his lowest total in terms of goals scored. The year before that was 19 goals. So there was maybe a bit of evidence there in some respects that, maybe his game was changing. Maybe he didn't have that explosivity in that final third. But the way he's adapted his game, he's just been a credit to himself, hasn't he? And we see every other day, he's in the gym. He treats his body like a temple, doesn't he? As the saying goes, he really does. And yeah, it's been one of the key aspects, I think, to this title charge and why Liverpool are about to win the Premier League title is because of Mohamed Salah. I think as you look over this season as a whole, he's always been the man that Liverpool have looked at in that attack as the man to go and get Liverpool the goals. And 27 goals in the league, like you say, a little bit of a drop-off in recent weeks, but possibly that is understandable given the volume of the minutes in the tank already this season. But yeah, I think, to earn himself that new deal as well, it almost looked like a no-brainer, didn't it? And I think that's real credit to him as well, that, a 32 going on 33, he's been able to make himself, unassailable within that lineup. He's a player who you simply can't see Liverpool without at the moment. And that goes for Van Dijk, who signed a new deal as well. So, yeah, I think he's just been incredible over the course of this season, and he's been central to everything good that Liverpool have been able to do. And he's going to go down as a hero at Liverpool, isn't he? I think he's third already in the all-time leading chart in terms of goals scored for Liverpool. I think he'll be chasing down Roger Hunt. I think Ian Rush is maybe one step too many for him. But I think, yeah, it's been incredible what he's been able to do at Liverpool in general. But I think this has been a real standout campaign for him. Other than maybe the first season at Anfield, I think this has possibly been his second best, if not the best. And yeah, to lead Liverpool essentially to a league title, a second at Liverpool, and one that he vehemently deserves. I think he's going to go down in history as one of the all-time greats at Liverpool for what he's done.
Yeah, I think Ian Rush might be one step too far in the next 2 years, but I wouldn't put him past him to sign another contract as well, and maybe do another year just to keep those numbers up. If he does carry on with what he's doing at the moment for the next 2 years, then certainly the argument will be there. I think it's obviously less likely the older he gets, but it's still very much, I think, a possibility that could happen. It could convince us at some point down the line, certainly. But sticking with the attack then, the final kind of point that I've picked out, they're not so much moments as kind of gradual improvements, really, for a couple of these players. Obviously, Mo Salah has been the focal point of the Liverpool attack, and I think that's been very, very deliberate from Arne Slot in terms of the way that Liverpool set up and the way that they position their attack. But I wanted to give a special mention to Cody Gakpo and Luis Diaz as well. Diaz, particularly in the first half of the season. Cody Gakpo, probably more consistent across the course of the campaign, I would say, in terms of his output. But I think it's been really interesting that Arne Slot has only used Cody Gakpo on the left. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp only used Luis Diaz on the left, or possibly once or twice on the right, but certainly not down the middle, as he has done this season. But he's been able to get another level of output from both of those players. Now, in the case of Luis Diaz, I think there's probably still a bit of a question mark heading into the summer whether he's got to the level that would make him unsellable or would make Liverpool want to nail him down to a new contract. But I do think it's definitely been a big plus that obviously Gakpo and Diaz, not so much with Darwin Núñez or Diogo Jota for different reasons, but certainly Gakpo and Diaz, he's definitely got another level out of them compared to what we've seen before.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been one of the best things about Arne Slot, that I think, not to discredit what Jurgen Klopp did in his final season, I think to add all them players in, it is essentially his squad, isn't it? They've only added Chiesa into the mix, but yeah, to get that extra level out of certain players, I think has been amazing from the manager. And yeah, I think them too, over the course of the season, it feels like when one of them's maybe been out of sorts, the other one's been able to step in and possibly just keeping them fresh. I think it's gone under the radar a little bit, but I think that's been really important for Liverpool. They're both kind of similar in terms of their output so far this season. I think Diaz in all competitions has got 15 goals, Cody Gakpo 16, so they're neck and neck really in that respect. But yeah, I think in terms of the Premier League, Luis Diaz has kind of led the way in that respect. He's maybe been backed a little bit more by the manager in certain games. He's also played that number 9 position that we referenced before. But yeah, I think having them both in the side, it's difficult to get them both on the pitch, isn't it? As we've alluded to there. And yeah, Cody Gakpo's maybe found that role for himself at Liverpool now on that left-hand side rather than the central role that Jurgen Klopp was looking to kind of adapt him to. But yeah, I think it's worked really well over the course of the season for Liverpool. The way them question marks of whether all them goals and all them opportunities were basically coming through Mohamed Salah at one stage. I think that probably was the case, but I think maybe, Diaz in recent weeks, he looks energised again, and maybe he's finding that end product again that we've all been wanting to see. So, yeah, I think there are maybe them question marks with Diaz long term, whether just given his age, given the fact he's a sellable asset at that age as well, given his contract, there's possibly that question of whether to move him on in the summer and maybe look for someone else. But you look at other players in the division who play that role, maybe Justin Kluivert, for example, at Bournemouth, or Anthony Gordon, who there were whispers of at Newcastle in the summer. Their output probably isn't much better than Luis Diaz, and possibly the grass isn't greener in that respect. And I think that role share between Diaz and Gakpo's worked really well, and ultimately it has put Liverpool in a position to win a league title. So I think maybe Arne Slot will look at it in the summer, and also obviously Richard Hughes and Michael Edwards, and they might sit there and go, when you look at kind of the hand they've got, it's possibly not too bad. And there might be other areas in the squad that are more pressing in terms of, improvement and that need for improvement. So, yeah, I think maybe, possibly if there is a deal to be made with a player and it's obvious that, he's the man to maybe replace a Diaz, maybe that's something they'll do. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does stay put and sign a new contract as well. I think that would make logical sense given, how he's done this season. So I can see that going either way, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's definitely a decision to be made really with him, whether that's a new contract or whether it's just sort of keeping him on the wages that he is now. I think he's got a couple of years left to run on that. So I think he's probably one of a number of players that will depend on the size of offers or whatever interest there might be in these players. That will dictate whether or not that happens. But just to tie all of this together then, I think, it's been a very impressive season. Liverpool on the brink of being confirmed as Premier League champions. It looked that way, if we're being honest, for quite a while. It's not really a huge surprise at this point, but we've not mentioned Arne Slot directly in any of these points. He kind of goes across all of them, and I want to give the final word really to how impressive he's been. I think there are times when the Premier League Manager of the Year is just automatically the manager that wins the Premier League title, and people don't really think too much about that. Obviously, there's one or two others who've done really, really good jobs. Nuno Espirito Santo is going to be right up there in the reckoning as well. But for me, Arne Slot to come in, take over from a legend in Jurgen Klopp, obviously improve a lot of the players that he inherited. He did obviously take on a really impressive squad, but didn't buy anybody because he hasn't really used Federico Chiesa. For all of those factors, I think he is right up there in terms of being the best in the Premier League this season. To do that at the first time of asking, I think is hugely, hugely impressive, isn't it? He's got to be right up there for the Manager of the Year conversation.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, to kind of flip the narrative on its head of what it was kind of coming into the season, obviously the examples were given of that changing of the guard at Manchester United when Alex Ferguson went out. Obviously at Arsenal, it took them a couple of managers down the line to get the right man as well when Arsene Wenger left. So I think deep down I was kind of expecting that to be similar at Liverpool, just given the evidence of recent years over the past kind of decade. And yeah, to kind of flip that on its head, to come in, put his own stamp on that team, succeed a living legend really at Liverpool and in the Premier League, what he was able to bring in terms of getting Liverpool back up to challenging on all fronts and re-energising the football club of what he was able to do at Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp. To take that forward, I mean, I guess the obvious comparison is with Bob Paisley, isn't it? You don't have to look too far at Liverpool, for that comparison. I think a lot of people have made it down the weeks and months, haven't they? Obviously with this Premier League title, hopefully on the way now, 1 point away. You can't help but make that comparison. Bill Shankly obviously laid the foundations for Bob Paisley to go on and win 3 European Cups and loads of league titles as well. So I think it was 8 league titles, wasn't it? So yeah, you're hoping, from a fan's perspective that Arne Slot, does follow in his footsteps. But yeah, it doesn't get away from the fact that, to succeed somebody who is a living legend, somebody who transformed Liverpool Football Club, to come in and almost build on what he was able to do. It looked like the impossible job when he came in. It really did. And to make it almost look easy, to come in from the Eredivisie where, there were certain question marks of whether he would be able to adapt. And, he's done more than adapt, hasn't he? So I'm really excited, and it's a great position to be in as a football club. I think that, there were certain, points made that, it feels like the second title for this team. But when you actually look at the first 11 of players who've been used, other than that obvious spine of players that we've referenced earlier, it is pretty much a new team, isn't it? So it is a first title, like Trent said, after the Leicester game for a lot of these players. And, it's testament to them buying into the manager as well from word go. We know them senior players, they've signed new deals now as well. So, yeah, there's been a massive buy-in from the players, a massive buy-in from the fans as well. And, I think the manager's been able to run with that. And, yeah, like I say, he's got to be the manager of the season for me now. Obviously, Nuno Espirito Santo's done an excellent job at Forest. But, yeah, to succeed a legend at Liverpool and do such a great job, he has to be manager of the year for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is so exciting, as Virgil van Dijk said about a week or so ago, the fact that they're at this level already, but there's still 5-6 positions that you think they could go and improve. They're going to have a full pre-season to work with Arne Slot, which just wasn't the case last summer because of international tournaments and things going on. Different players were injured. I think Andy Robertson missed most of the pre-season because of injury. There's so many different things that are going to happen in Liverpool's favour this summer that mean that they could get even better next season, and probably should, and I expect them to get even better next season, which is obviously hugely exciting. I'm sure we'll discuss that plenty of times across the summer on this podcast, but for now I think it's just important to kind of live in the moment and enjoy the title celebrations. We assume that they're going to happen this week, and obviously for the rest of this season, heading into that title parade as well. It's going to be an enjoyable few weeks, I think, to be a Liverpool supporter. So rather than looking too far ahead, I think it's important just to enjoy what has happened and what is happening in this moment. And I'm sure we will discuss all of that on next week's Liverpool.com podcast as well. But for now, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you to Tom for joining me, for you at home as well for watching or for listening along too. We'll be back at a similar time next time on the Blood Red channel with next week's Liverpool.com podcast.